Chapter 3 of the Gongchik. Vajra statement number 1 of chapter 3. Many people claim that the Vinaya basket, Vinaya Pitaka, remember I was talking about the 3 Pitakas. Many people claim that the Vinaya Pitaka, that is an, quote, excellent dharma of others, belongs to the Hinayana. So here, Kyoba Rinpoche will say, the Vinaya is common to all vehicles. There are, like even, especially, of course, in Mahayana circles. So in the history of Buddhism as it developed in Tibet, in China, in Korea, in Japan, in the broader view, you do see sometimes certain groups saying, the Vinaya is only for the Hinayana types. We, the Mahayana people, we should be ordained using a different set of criterion. Particularly, this happened, a very famous case in medieval Japan. One of the founders of an important lineage in Japanese Buddhism called Tendai, which is the Japanese version of the Tiantai in China. But Japanese Tendai and Chinese Tiantai are somewhat different because of the way they developed. But the Japanese Tendai, the lineage comes from the Chinese Tiantai. But the way it developed in Japan, the founder, when he came back from China to Japan and wanted to teach this lineage that he came back with, called Tiantai, his ability to ordain disciples was limited because at that time the Japanese government gave the authority to ordain Buddhist monks to an existing group of Buddhist lineages that were based in one area, in the Nara area of Japan. These 6 lineages. So the founder of Tendai could not ordain his own disciples. And so that, in that instance, really got him to look for alternative ways of ordaining. So that's like a forced by circumstances. But interestingly, though forced by circumstances, we can see that side. He also eventually, him and his disciples eventually articulated kind of a philosophical, you can say, or a doctrinal position why they should be ordained using a Mahayana bodhisattva vow to be ordained as monks and nuns. So they reject the individual liberation vows and say that's, for Hinayana people. We Mahayana, we should be ordained only with bodhisattva vow. And so you have one example like this. Of course, like I said, given their historical circumstance, it made sense, because he wasn't able to do it with the individual liberation vows. But nonetheless, in trying to get around that problem, they presented, kind of a doctrinal reason. Yeah. So insofar as the doctrinal reason, putting aside the actual historical problem they had to deal with, if you look at their doctrinal arguments, then Kyoba Rinpoche is going to object to that. He's going to say, no, you cannot say that doctrinally, us Mahayana people should abandon the so-called Hinayana vows, which is the vows of individual liberation, which is the Vinaya Pratimoksha, the topic of this chapter. So you also obviously have movements like that in Tibet. Of course, those movements never became well established. So today you can say, no Tibetan Buddhist lineage would say this. Oh, the Vinaya is only 4. But there are Westerners following Tibetan Buddhism that sometimes you'll find they'll say this. That, oh, we hold the Tantric Samaya. And that's higher. So once we have the Tantric Samaya, automatically, Bodhisattva vow is included. Automatically, individual liberation vow is included. And in fact, they will say, if ever in a situation where these 3 are conflicting, we should hold the highest one, which is the Samaya, then everything will be fine. Gilbert Rinpoche would actually disagree with that. He says, the idea that you hold the higher one and somehow the 2 lower ones are included is a mistaken view. Then we'll see, in the next 3 chapters, why that's a mistaken view. I can tell you that one line of reasoning he gives is, if you undermine the foundational level of any building, any house, then it doesn't matter if you have 100 floors or 5 floors or even just 2 floors. If the foundation is undermined, if the foundation is ignored, if the foundation is not strong, then everything else that is built on that foundation would collapse. No surprise, because already we saw in talking about briefly in chapter 6, we came across the reference to how of the 4 empowerments on the Vajrayana level, starting with the vase empowerment and the highest being the word empowerment, right? He says, the vase empowerment, if you don't have that, if that is not stable, the other 3 empowerments is going to be very hard, if not impossible. So again, he emphasized the ground level work. So here he says the Vinaya is common to all vehicles. Peace and happiness at the level of the Hinayana, the joys and pleasures that fool the childish ones, arise depending on the pratimoksha. And so this is an interesting way to start his commentary. The Sinha Parapritya Sutra says, through disciplined conduct, Shila, one proceeds to happy existences. So it's saying, yes, even the common level of happiness, that which is unreliable, that which can come and go, but even that level of happiness and pleasure, it can only arise because we observe the basic vows of training of not harming others. So the essence of the Vinaya Pratimoksha is not causing harm, both to ourselves and to others. So here it says, even the happiness of the childish ones, even that kind of happiness necessarily come from avoiding the 10 non-virtues. Then on the medium level, the vehicles of Shravakas and Pratyeka Buddhas too also depend on individual liberation vows. So the Sanjayagata says, Through disciplined conduct, those who seek peace become noble ones. So he's going through all the stages. Those who just want samsaric pleasures, it is already said, even that has to come from ethical conduct. Then those who strive for limited individual liberation, as arhats, as shravakas, and pratyekabuddhas, even those need this disciplined conduct. Then on the supreme level, the result of complete awakening also depends on the pratimoksha. So the Vinaya Vibhanga says, of all awakening that Buddhas and Pratyekabuddhas achieve, of any arhat qualities possessed by those beings who are disciples of the Buddha, the cause is to be found. The cause is taught to be the Vinaya. Such things as the root of the Bodhisattva Pitaka, too, come under the rubric of pratimoksha. So even Bodhisattva vows belong to pratimoksha. The 50th section of the Pratimoksha commentary, composed by Acharya Vimalamitra, says, concerning the term pratimoksha, it is so called since liberation and all-knowingness are actualized by practicing the training of giving up wrong conduct and implementing right conduct without confusing them. Vimalamitra was an early teacher that came from India to Tibet in the 8th century during the time of Guru Rinpoche. So Choda is, quoting one of these important figures, especially for Dzogchen traditions. Okay? So he's saying, even in the Dzogchen, great masters have already said that if you want to achieve liberation and all-knowingness, meaning Buddha, then pratimoksha is essential. The Bodhisattva Pitaka says that if it were not like that, it would be incompatible with the basic scripture of the Bodhisattva Pratimoksha, and the Upali Paripricha Sutra speaks of the Pratimoksha of Bodhisattva. The training of Pratimoksha is also common within mantra. And so even in secret mantra, pratimoksha is also required. With killing, stealing, lying, and sexual misconduct treated in a very similar way. The Parishodhana Tantra says, do not drink alcohol, do not eat meat, and so on. So this is given in this yoga tantra. Thus it is taught in many scriptures. In the Sutra Pitaka 2, the Nandika Sutra teaches 36 faults of alcohol, and the Bodhisattva Pitaka teaches 35 faults, and so on. Therefore, not only is the Pratimoksha a common vehicle, but it is the root of all Pitakas, all the different collections of the Buddha's teachings. The root is the Pratimoksha. The authoritative scriptures of the Vinaya says, just as here the root of the tree is the principal thing, both the basis for growth and the support of all, similarly the basis and root of all the various collections of excellent Dharma is taught to be the Vinaya. However, the swiftness of attaining the result of these vehicles, namely Buddhahood, depends on greater and lesser effort. So he's saying here, right, sometimes people confuse things and say, oh, pratimoksha is for those who are very slow. Samayas are for those who are very fast. And he says, no. Because samaya on the Vajrayana level, Bodhisattva vows of training on the Mahayana level, all those are grounded in the individual liberation vows of the so-called Hinayana, where the difference is how much effort you put in. That will make it greater and lesser. Thus, the Buddha Pitaka Sutra teaches that even though Maitreya Nata, meaning the future Buddha Maitreya, cultivated the resolve for awakening 400 million eons earlier than our teacher Buddha Shakyamuni. Due to Buddha Shakyamuni's greater effort, he achieved Buddhahood sooner. So actually Maitreya, the Buddha to come, made the bodhicitta vow 400 million eons earlier than Buddha Shakyamuni. But Buddha Shakyamuni put in great effort. And so he achieved Buddhahood first. And the opposite of, quote, harming others along with its mental basis too, is similar in all three vows. So it's saying, whether it's pratimoksha vows, to give up harming others and the mental basis, right? The state of mind that gives rise to such attitude, giving up those two things, whether it's pratimoksha, whether it's bodhisattva, whether bodhisattva vow, whether it's tantric samayas, all three, this principle is at the heart. Since it is ascertained through these and many other reasons that pratimoksha is a common vehicle, do not follow the general views of some old Tibetans. This might be a slight jab at certain Nyingmapas when it says old Tibetans. A slight jab. Chodra, not Kyoba Rinpoche, right? This is Chodra's commentary. Because among some Nyingmas, they might get too excited with how profound Dzogchen is, that then you don't need to worry about all the other vows. There's that kind of view. Even today, like if you look at the four lineages, among Nyingmapas, they're most likely to kind of say, all these lower levels, not important. We hold the mantrayana. We are ngakpas. Ngakpas mean, followers of secret mantra. Ngak, sangha, ngakpa. These days, we just use ngakpa to mean someone who is not a monk, but is a practitioner in the Tibetan tradition. It's become fashionable to call them ngakpas. So then, especially in the West, everybody loves to become ngakpa, then that is pretty good for my business. I sell the ngakpa uniform. So on that side, I'm like, yeah, more ngakpa, even better, But actually, this is this ngakpa, the real ngakpa, don't depend on uniform. The real ngakpa is the one that really wield mantra by through understanding and through conduct. And likewise, these days, like the most conservative, like the Gelugpas, are the most kind of careful about the vows, particularly the Vinaya vows, the Pratimoksha vows. And that is the legacy of the Kadampa emphasis. So it's important to pay attention to that point. Any questions or comments for this? Your reaction? You're seeing or not seeing how this might still play out today, even though the mainstream says, oh, you practice all three. But I think many examples of how, especially the first level, is undermined, I think. Or people kind of dismiss it. That's like Buddhism for dummies. So people want to be ngakpa because, you can drink. You can have as many sexual partners as you like, and you say, oh, I don't have that vow, And then they say, I'm practicing as a ngakpa, you know, it's like, oh my God.
I think it's pretty interesting the way he sort of always goes back to the basics.
Mm-hmm,
You
mm-hmm.
know, just like those opening prayers that we do.
Yes,
Others think it's not important. We think it's important.
yes,
That seems to be a recurring theme in his.
absolutely. Absolutely. And so therefore not very attractive or sexy to, you know, those looking for excitement.
True.
Maybe more suitable for people who are getting old and cannot, you know, behave like these super ngakpas in any case. Yeah. So Nathan, maybe your inner child is 65. And so now you're stuck with the Drigungpas.
You say Gelugpas take their vows seriously.
Yeah.
I'm reminded of Venerable George one time as an example. He was talking about like trying to apply regret when you break a vow or something like that. And he used this example of, like being in a shower and using some soap that's not yours. Like, it wasn't given to you. And at that time, like I thought of, like not stealing, like you don't go to a store and steal.
Yes, yes.
It's like, oh, wow. Yeah, that is.
Oh, yes. Yeah.
Awesome.
Yeah. Something as simple as, you know, a bar of soap, you know, if you live in a community that isn't yours, just out of convenience, right? You take that, it's already, you know, some kind of stealing has already occurred. It's the worst kind of stealing because of the two, you know, going to a store and rob a store is better in a way, right? Because it's very explicit. This is bad. But it's the kind of stealing that we habitually do that we don't even recognize as a fault. That's more dangerous. So again, so that's a good example of, in fact, then, what Kyoba Rinpoche is actually emphasizing and pointing to is that of the three poisons, right? Confusion is the most dangerous. Attachment and aversion arose from confusion. Not knowing is more dangerous than the other two. Even though the other two produce negative results that tend to manifest very quickly. Attachment and aversion, right? The negative results of attachment and aversion, it turns up very quickly. And when it turns up, can be very painful. But the true culprit or driving force of these two is confusion or ignorance. Now, that one is very hidden always. So in fact, in Kyoba emphasizing the foundations, the basics, when you want to get right down to it, what he's emphasizing is the dangers of ignorance, confusion. And you see that this principle plays out in the whole Vinaya chapter business, so to say, where he says, it's better to take a vow and break it than not to take a vow and think, oh, I don't have any problem. I did not take a vow about, you know, being celibate. I didn't take the vow, so it's fine. He says, that's worse. Take the vow, he says. So then the taking of that vow becomes a way to shine a light on the karma of any situation.
Yeah, I think when you take a vow like that, whether or not you are really cognizant of it, it seems to me like, you get more of a feeling like of the not quite right when you like borrow someone's soap, you know.
Yes, borrow someone's soap, right? Yes.
in that way, it's mental.
And he will say, you know, like Gilbert Rinpoche, it's like, you know, you borrowed someone's soap, you know, then you might think, you know, I'll give them back, you know. He says those are two different actions. So you borrow the soap, right? And then tomorrow you give like a whole bottle new soap to this person. It's like, that's virtue. But this borrowing is non-virtue. He says, be clear about it. Of course, don't keep these vows in a way that is tight. Then it's a lot of pressure. So if you have to borrow, at least, you know, confess later. Hey, sorry, you know, I ran out of soap, then I grabbed your soap, and that wasn't good. So I'll be more mindful next time. You know, that's important. Then you develop mindfulness and say, you know, don't forget your soap. That's good. Because otherwise, right, even with roommates, eventually people get upset. You see how, you know, little things, right, is where it becomes big. And then when it becomes big, then it's too big. You know, they're like, what? You know, like we got along just okay. But little things that we are not mindful about, it accumulates. Then when suffering is full blown, and then we say, oh, what methods can I use? In some ways, it's a little too late. Yeah. Buddha gave, you know, the things to kind of to tackle, you know, before it turns big. If we can pay attention to that most preliminary level of dependent arising, before it completely arises, you know, pay attention to the smallest. Likewise, auspicious interdependent arising, also don't underestimate. As simple as, you know, taking a little crumb of your muffin as you sit eating, because you see some ants. You take a little, you put down, and you let them eat. That is some kind of auspicious dependent arising. And who knows, you know, these ants will be your retinue when you become a qualified guru. And that's probably also why some highly qualified guru, in terms of their realization and their ability to teach, have no disciples, because they never fed any ants. You know, they saw a whole, you know, group of ants, which is thousands of them, and never thought, you know, oh, here, a little bit of muffin, you know, blow on this crumb and put there. That's the dependent arising, you know. Sometimes when we get too clever with sophisticated dharma and all the categories, then we forget, you know, that these actions like this is important. I want to call your attention to an important footnote in terms of translation. Footnote 475, yeah. Sobish says, meditation is a hazy and multivalent term, meaning the English term meditation can mean so many things. At the same time, it's so hazy, so imprecise. So he says, it is not a direct translation of any term or concept stemming from Asian traditions, but is historically rooted in European philosophy and Christianity. It can, for instance, be found in the writings of Clement of Alexandria, this 1st, 2nd century Christian, who combined Greek philosophical traditions with Christian doctrine and propagated a meditation on the inner or symbolic meaning of scripture. One finds it also in Hugh St. Victor's Cogitatio, Meditatio, and Contemplatio, in the spiritual exercises of Saint Ignatius, and in the mystic writings of the Spanish Carmelites, Teresa of Avila and John of the Cross, or in the 17th century pietism of the true Protestant church. Furthermore, we also find the term quote-unquote meditation in the Western tradition of philosophy. On the other hand, even a limited list of Sanskrit terms in the context of meditative practice would include dhyana, samadhi, shamatha, vipassana, samapatti, anusmriti, yoga, or bhavana. I therefore find it unwise to use the noun meditation in the context of any of them. So Sobish is saying, too loaded, the word meditation. Then on top of that today, right, there's all kinds of New Age and Hindu use of this term. It is perhaps best to use the term only as an adjective, together with a more precisely defined noun, or to leave the Sanskrit term altogether untranslated, as I prefer here for samadhi. So samadhi is a particular type of training. And so here he's talking about the three trainings. So the three trainings, shiksha. From among the three trainings, the present chapter deals with disciplined conduct, the first of the three, shila. The other two trainings are samadhi, which is a general term for meditative concentration. So that's the adjective that he's talking about, meditative. For bhavana, right, which I like to translate as cultivate, which is also, again, translated as meditation. There, Sobish likes to use the phrase meditative practice for bhavana, which I have pointed out, it means to cultivate. And in Chinese, it's also cultivate, xiu, to xiu, to cultivate. Yeah. So here for samadhi, he uses meditative concentration, but which I have left untranslated in this book. So he says in this book, he has left it as samadhi. So the training in samadhi and discriminative knowledge. Discriminative means like discerning knowledge. I don't like discriminative, maybe because too much of US civil rights issues, discrimination. So that has colored I prefer discernment, discerning. So this discerning knowledge. So prajna, right, is not a fuzzy kind of like wisdom. And prajna is a very, like the sword of Manjushri, you know, the sharpness of that sword is symbolizing this quality of prajna, where it's discerning. It sees very clearly, right? I translate shila, sutrim, as disciplined conduct, chiefly to avoid reference to morality. Again, right? Shila is sometimes translated, especially in older Western writings about Buddhism, as morality. But again, this English word morality has its Western baggage. So Sobish talks about it here. One might argue that there's an element of morality in the sense of Western general philosophical ethics in the Buddha's transformation of the Vedic karma mechanism into a new understanding of karma. In the ancient Vedic culture, karma refers more to ritual actions. Ritual actions. Specific religious rituals are called karmas, and you have to perform those karmas in order for good things to happen to you. In order to get your desire fulfilled the right way, you perform a bunch of karmas. But Buddha used the term karma more broadly as any kind of actions taken with intention involved. That is karma. So he says, you could argue that in some ways, yes, Buddha's way of talking about karma has some relationship with the Western notion of morality. This new understanding involves seeing karma not only a fundamental law of nature, but chiefly as intention and personal responsibility. But the case is much more complex with respect to the rules of disciplined conduct. And so the way the Buddha talk about Shila is much more complex than that, which in Jigten Sumgön's thinking strictly adhere to the fundamental nature as discovered by the Buddha. So Jigten Sumgön's discussion about disciplined conduct is ultimately linked to or grounded in that the Buddha saw that this is exactly how things work. So in fact, for Jigten Sumgön, he says, the things that are taught in the Vinaya Practice Moksha truly reveals the Buddha's wisdom. So for him, Buddha's wisdom is not so much about, right, abstract philosophical arguments and speculative thought. Oh, the universe is like this. Oh, the nature of mind is like that, and this and that. He says the true wisdom of the Buddhists is not really in those areas. Everything is one and one is everything. He says it's not there. The true wisdom of the Buddha can be seen most clearly in what he prescribes and what he proscribes, what he recommends and what he advises against. This point will become clear in this chapter, particularly in the Vajra statements that discuss the concepts of misdeed by rule and misdeed by nature and invertebrate prohibition and invertebrate permission. And in statement 315, which teaches that the transgression of the rules by any being of the six realms is a fault. So he uses prohibition and permission. I feel that even has like Judeo-Christian baggage to prohibit and to permit. Who gets to prohibit and who gets to permit? Who gets to permit and who gets to prohibit? Who gets to do that? In your house, who gets to do that? Cecile. Who gets to do that, Cecile?
Case, I'm the mother, so I give the permission to.
Right. Yeah, exactly. Right. It's like an authoritarian position, right? I'm the mother. These are my rules. You live under this roof. You live under these rules, right? Then finally, right, if you're living under your own roof, you know, then I'm boss now, right? Then sometimes what I prohibit, I can permit, right? And sometimes what I permit, I can prohibit. So I find that, at least in English, the better terms for this prohibit and permit is to prescribe and to proscribe. And that is the language of like healer, doctor's language. The doctors prescribe and the doctors proscribe. Oh, you should reduce your sugar. You should not take salt. You should not, be so inactive. Oh, you should take this 3 times a day, prescription and proscription. Because again, in the Buddhist system, there is no God making up rules and enforcing rules. And then, when God feels like it, change the rules. So the Buddha cannot, say, oh, you have been so good. I'll give you a break. Here, you can have some candy on the bed, Now, temporarily, it's allowed now. Because you have been good. And you have had a hard day. So here, have a break. No, it doesn't work like that, Buddha is not in any position to prohibit or to permit. He didn't make up the rules.
Yeah, but sometimes you can teach, or you can always teach if they look at you, if they look your behavior.
Yes.
Sometimes you can teach without words.
Yes. Always, actually. That's why the Buddha had this influence over his students, because it was his example, not his words. Again, sometimes, we get these teachings, we misapply the teachings, So there's a lot of teachings who say, don't look at the faults of others. A general teaching like that. Don't look at the faults of others. Right? Don't occupy your mind with how this person is wrong this way or that way or that way or that way. Then along these lines, the teachings get applied to, especially don't look for faults in your guru. Because whatever faults that you're going to find, you can find it as long as you have those faults in your mind. Also, very sound, very reasonable, actually, that advice. But when that turns into a teacher not living by example the teachings and using that to get off the hook among his or her students, then the Dharma have been perverted. It happens a lot. When something goes wrong, people will say, oh, but don't follow what he does, take his teachings. Yeah, that's also sound advice. Yes, true. At the end of the day, who behaves, who doesn't behave is their karma. True. But too much of saying that, I think, is actually very dangerous for teachers. Then some teachers even might proudly say, I never told you to do what I do. I only told you to do what the Buddha told you to do. As if, those two can be separated. Because the Buddha said, no, actually, the best teacher is yourself manifesting that example. Yeah. Chokyi mentions a 50th section of the Pratimoksha commentary by Acharya Vimalamitra, but such a large commentary by A. Vimalamitra is not known. So, Sobish says, there's a quote like this, but he said, it's not being able to find such a quote. And so in any case, even though he cannot find the source of that quote, he says, but there is a definition of pratimoksha there, which says, liberation and omniscience are actualized by practicing the training of giving up wrong conduct and implementing right conduct without confusing these two. The text thus provides the first element, prati, sosor, a curious etymology, explaining it as without mixing them up, that is, mistaking the things to be abandoned and those to be accomplished. So sosor, so individual liberation, right, pratimoksha, has a few ways of explaining, and they are all in agreement. Pratimoksha, as in, this is what you have to practice to have yourself freed. So individual liberation. But individual liberation has also been glossed at, being explained as, you should see the respective individual in that sense, ripening of causes and not getting them confused. So here, individual liberation also means wisdom of seeing, which is cause, which is effect, which is cause, which is effect. Don't confuse the two. As in, back to the soap that you borrowed. Your borrowing of the soap, that is an act of taking without permission. You're giving this person, a new bar of soap the next day or an hour later is an act of generosity. Those are not to be confused as one action. The first action has created some negative result. The second action has created positive results or set in motion the potential of a positive result to come. How they are going to ripen is always clear and distinct. Yeah, so individual also in that sense. Dorshema, it says, gives an example of how in secret mantra, even in secret mantra practice, or especially in secret mantra, pratimoksha principles lie at the heart. For example, abandoning killing. The bodhisattva does not only abandon killing, rather, he forsakes his life for awakening. Since in the mantra, in secret mantra, in Vajrayana, all beings are to be seen as deities. Killing a being is like killing a deity, and there is no greater evil than that. As for abandoning hoarding, to hoard, greed, the bodhisattva is not even attached to his body. And in the mantra context, the leftovers of a Gana chakra are collected and offered away. Abandoning alcohol. The bodhisattva should not drink alcohol himself and should not offer it to others. In mantra, unless one is able to transform alcohol into nectar, if one drinks alcohol, one will fall into the howling hell. It's being taught. These are some of the controversial topics of the three vows that the present and the following two chapters will discuss. So we will hear more about this. Chukidrakpa, in passing, defines pratimoksha as that which is the opposite of, quote, harming others, together with its mental basis. Although I have not located a canonical version of this definition, it has been stated in key writings of the three vows by numerous authors, including Vibhuti Chandra, Gorampa, Gampopa, Lochen Dhamashri, and Karma Trinlepa. Vibhuti Chandra is Indian master. Gorampa, Sakya tradition. Gampopa, of course, Kagyupa. Lochen Damashri, Nyingma, and Karma Trinlepa, a later Karma Kagyulama. The following chapters contain arguments that this attitude is the basis for all three vows. That is to say, the abandonment of harming others together with this mental basis is also the fundamental basis of benefiting others, which is the essence of the Bodhisattva vows. This principle also appears in mantra, where it is in addition pervaded by the means of taking the fruit as the path. That is, one practices this principle within the mandala of the deity. Choki Drakpa, closing reference to old Tibetans who disagree with the essential identity of the three vows, may be a reference to those who live before and during the initial phase of the second translation period and were accused of practicing wild forms of mantra. Yes, so today we're going to stop here. The last paragraph of Sobish's last couple of paragraphs we shall come back to because they're important, central to understanding the rest of this chapter. We're going to come back to that. Yeah, any questions or comments till this point? If not, Chanchu Semchu Rinpoche Ma Gye Barnam Gye Gyurche Gye Ba Nyam Pa Me Pa Yang Gong Ne Gong Du Belwar Sho. You all have a good weekend. We will continue on Monday. Then meanwhile, let's see. Yeah, that's it really. I was going to say there's a new series starting on Tuesday. And many of you already have a Tuesday evening program, Dharma program. But the new series starting on Tuesday evening is every other Tuesday, starting this Tuesday, this coming Tuesday. It's on renunciation, bodhicitta, and emptiness. Je Rinpoche Tsongkhapa called these the three aspects, the three main points of the path. And so he has a short text that he composed that explains these 3 points. So I'm doing this for the Ecuador and Peru communities. So on Tuesday evening, every other Tuesday, starting from this Tuesday, from my time, 7:30 to 9 o'clock. It will be recorded. So if you already have a program, like I know Tibet House Guatemala, you already have a program, you should stay with that program. But for those of you who are not doing that program, then it will be on Zoom. I will share it with the Guru Puja Gongchik WhatsApp so that you can get access to that Zoom. It will be translated into Spanish since it's for the Ecuador and Peru Sanghas, and possibly translated into Portuguese the Brazil Sangha would like to participate, but they're probably going to do the translation like independent, so that we're not taking so much time to do 2 translations. It takes up a lot of time. So anyway, this is coming up this Tuesday, and for 4 Tuesdays. Then early November is the Medicine Buddha retreat, right? Then also in October, before that, is the Guatemala Tibet House retreat that will start on a Friday evening and end on a Sunday morning. And that is on the Heart Sutra. On Heart Sutra. So let me read quickly the title of that. It's called Cultivating the 3 Jhanas with the Heart Sutra. The Heart Sutra is one of the most known of all Buddhist scriptures and is recognized for its profundity, brevity, and sometimes seemingly enigmatic words. As one author puts it, it is, quote, a sweeping attack on everything we hold most dear, our troubles, the world as we know it, even the teachings of the Buddha himself, unquote. Philosophically, its contents reveal the very heart or essence of reality, the content of Buddha wisdom. Pragmatically speaking, the sutra is chanted daily at monasteries, hermitages, and homes as a potent form of protection against physical harm in the turmoil of misfortune. In this retreat, Dr. Lai will help us practice the Heart Sutra on all the different levels, and especially with a special emphasis, especially with an emphasis on the nature of mind aspect as taught in the Kagyu Mahamudra tradition. Yes, so this is October 16, 17, that particular weekend. Yeah, 16, 17, 18. So the evening of 16, my evening, to around noontime on the 18th. So if you're interested in joining that, you have to register with Guatemala Tibet House. If you go to Facebook, Casa Tibet Guatemala, then you can get information from there. Then perhaps next time when we meet on Monday, if you have the link to that information, someone can put in the chat window here, then others who want to be part of this retreat can get information from there. Yeah, so that's it. You all have a good weekend.
Thank you, Dr. Lai.
Yeah.
Gracias.
Bye.